Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching this video because we're talking about classics, collector vehicles, and the vehicles that you should look for going into 2022, which could be great investments. You see, our friends over at Hagerty have put together their 2022 bull market list. And Hagerty is one of the leading classic car insurers here in the USA. I buy their insurance for my classic cars. This is not sponsored in any way. I pay them plenty of money every single year, as do a lot of other people. But because they're so big and because they follow classic car prices so closely, they have tons and tons of data that they put together and that they analyze to come up with the top 10 vehicles which could be good investments based on current trends going into the upcoming year. Now, they not only look at why the vehicle's cool, why it's special, what it's been worth in recent years, they look at auction data, but they also look at stuff such as who's buying the vehicles, so what generation of people, what cars are more popular with Gen X's, with millennials, and we'll talk about all of that in today's video. And at the end of this video, the number one vehicle is incredibly surprising and probably not one that you'd expect. Now, if you want to check out the full list, I'll link to the description below. A big thank you to Hagerty for putting this together. It takes a ton of work, a lot of data analytics. Number 10 on our list is the Suzuki Samurai. And the Samurai is a really interesting little off-roader. When it was sold brand new, it was one of the most affordable cars here in the US, and for a long time they were dirt cheap. But within the last few years, they've gotten quite expensive, especially when in stock and in good condition. We actually owned one in 1987, and it was a fantastic little four-wheel drive that was a ton of fun to cruise around in. Now, what is Hagerty seeing price-wise on the Samurai? So what they do is they rate vehicle condition from 1 through 5, and they looked at basically number 2 out of 5. 2 is still a very good condition, very sorted mechanically and cosmetically, but perhaps not the best in the world, so not full-on concours. But they've noticed that Samurai is somewhere between $10,000 and $14,500, which is up 5% 2020 to 2021, which is an interesting thing. Now, paying over $10,000 for a Samurai seems like a bold move if you saw the market like 10-15 years ago, where a Samurai was like a $4,000 car at best, and then everyone chopped them up and put big tires on them, and Ford V6s was a common swap. But now that they're becoming kind of rare, and now that so many of them have been chopped up and destroyed off-road, stock ones in good condition are getting pretty expensive. And the other thing Hagerty found is that 70% of new folks insuring Samurais with Hagerty are Gen X's or younger. So people my age, millennials, are finding that these 1980s Japanese vehicles are extremely cool, and that is driving some of the price on these cars. So $10,000 to $14,500 if you want a good one right now. So that's number 10 on our list. I'm going to choose my number 9, and that's going to be the first generation Mazda RX7. So once again, a vehicle from the 1980s. Okay, first year was 1979, but the first generation Mazda RX7, another vehicle we bought. We bought a really good one a few years back for $6,000, 50,000 miles, one owner, and we sold it for like a whopping $6,500 after putting $1,000 into it. That's TFL economics right there. However, in recent years, especially within like the last 3-4 years, they have just exploded in value. So the Mazda that Hagerty took a look at, number 2 condition, $17,500 through $27,000 for a good one now. That is up 26% 2020 through 2021, which is crazy. And that number is up 136% since 2016. Now, that, of course, is driven a lot by millennials and Gen Xers once again. The first Gen RX-7 didn't really get the attention it deserved for a while there. I think the last generation with the big, crazy turbocharged power numbers, that was the one that really stole the limelight. But people are realizing the first gen, the FB RX-7s, are truly special. I loved ours. You can get them in both carbureted and fuel-injected form. Of course, a little rotary engine that zips all the way up to redline. There's a little buzzer at redline to let you know that you're need to shift, because they're just so incredibly smooth. 5-speed manual transmissions. There was an automatic available, but definitely get the manual. I think condition is another one of these. It's going to be pretty hard to find. A lot of them were thrashed, a lot of them were modified, but if you can get a good one, now you're going to be paying close to $20,000, which is interesting. All right, moving down the list to number 8. So this is another one that I think really appeals to the younger generation. The Volvo 245, the turbocharged wagons, the bricks. Now, these cars were often overlooked as just used cars, and they were driven to death by people that really didn't care about cars. But now these turbocharged Volvo wagons cost a pretty penny. So the one Hagerty looked at, number 2 condition, $15,500 through $21,500. That's up 5% 2020 through 2021. Once again, younger collectors. We're not looking at people in their 70s, 80s. We're looking at people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So millennial and Gen X's. And Hagerty brought up a good point too. They said part of this is due to the unattainability of like the 1980s Mercedes diesel wagons, like the one that I had, the 123. Those are really expensive in the 300 TD wagons. So the Volvo Turbo Bricks, incredible cars. They've got the cool 1980s looks with Volvo reliability. Love that they're starting to come up in value. You know, we're talking close to $20K for a good one now, which is, whew, tell that to people 5-10 years ago, and they would have looked at you with a funny look. Now, going back to a slightly an older vehicle, Mercedes SL. So, of course, the old Gullwing SLs, the original 300 SL Roadsters, those are $1 million cars now. And then as you get later and later, they become more affordable. But the interesting one I want to talk about is a model from the 60s called the Pagoda. A good one, $80,500 through $108,500 for an SL230 like they looked at. That's up 35% 2020 through 2021. And the interesting thing that Hagerty found is a lot of the 230 SLs are being exported from the U.S., where they're worth some 30% more abroad. So they've seen a lot of these vehicles be exported to other countries. Now, of course, big money, $80,000 to $108,000, but an incredible car, and perhaps one you want to look at if you want the ultimate in luxury and you have some money to spend. Now, chilling it down a little bit, we've got the 1965 through 1970 Cadillac DeVille. Maybe not quite as prestigious as some of the other high-end Cadillacs, but Hagerty said this is one to watch, up 14% 2020 through 2021 and up 20% in the last 5 years. The prices at the one they looked at, $28,500 through $38,500. A gorgeous car, incredibly long. You've got the beautiful headlight designs, the long, the low, the wide look that American cars were so known for in the 1960s, and now these cars are finally getting their spot in the limelight because for a long time there, they were extremely affordable. So going to something completely unaffordable, the first car that Hagerty actually had on their list was the Ferrari 246 Dino GTS, $366,000 to $402,000. They've seen a lot of Gen X buyers. It's increased 5% in 2020 through 2021, but there was a lull in these cars from 2016 through 2018, so they kind of dipped down in price, but now they're back up in a big way. Another car that is really worth a ton of money, the Pontiac GTO, the first generation. Now, I always thought these cars were pretty expensive, but I didn't realize they were this expensive. The one Hagerty looked at, $100,000 to over $120,000. Now, we didn't see much price change in 2020 through 2021, but one thing that's interesting is that millennials now are really taking notice of the GTO. I mean, so often I think we associate millennials with like souped up Subarus, maybe Mitsubishi Evos from, the 2000s, but apparently based on insurance data, they're also taking note of the GTOs, a really classic, iconic American muscle, which is pretty cool, but you're going to have to pay for it over $100,000. So another vehicle which folks are really paying attention to, the Land Rover Defenders. So, of course, the North American spec are crazy expensive. They're up 47% since 2016, and you're going to be paying close to, in some cases, like $80,000, $90,000, or $100,000. But even imported ones are going for a lot of money. The one that Hagerty looked at, $61,500 through $77,500 for a 1991. They built a lot of Defenders over the years. We're talking well into the millions. However, here in the US, still pretty unusual. Lots and lots of people are importing them. It's worth noting you got to be very careful on who you buy one from because it's either going to be great or perhaps a basket case that someone slapped some paint on. However, I'm really excited to see the Defender on this list. Incredibly cool. Depending on the market, you might have a gas engine, you might have a little diesel engine, right-hand drive, left-hand drive. All the US models had big V8s, the Rover V8, 3.5-liter V8. I think it was a 3.5. Someone let me know in the comment section below. But the American ones, they only sold them for a few years in the mid-90s. Very rare and extremely expensive, so importing them is the only way to go if you want to get one on a budget, but even the ones on a budget are stupid expensive now. So moving on to a vehicle I'm excited about because we bought its cousin, the Porsche 968, the last of the 4-cylinder water-cooled Porsches. So it started life as a 924 and then went to the 944 and then evolved to the 968. Now these cars were super cheap for a long time. But now they're getting pretty expensive. The one Hagerty looked at in condition number 2, $38,000 through $51,500, up 8% in 2020 through 2021. I think this is pretty interesting because we just bought a 944 Turbo, which is like the predecessor to the 968. We bought it for $18,000, and it's seriously the best performance sports car I've ever driven. The balance, the 50-50 weight distribution, the quality of the build, the sound you get when you close the door, the way the turbo comes on boost. Parts are somewhat affordable, and it's just an amazing car to drive. But the interesting thing about the next gen, the 968, the reason that it's on this list, it's the fastest appreciation for all Porsche coupes in the last several years. Prices are up 139% for 968 coupes since 2016. 139%. Now, the 968s are pretty rare. Not a huge sales win for Porsche, so perhaps that's also driving the prices because there's just not that many of them, but beautiful cars, very well made, and one I would love to own someday. But we basically do because the 944 is kind of like the predecessor. Let's move on, and this is where things are going to get really interesting because the number one car on my list, which Hagerty mentioned and talked about in depth, was the Tesla Roadster. The Tesla Roadster Sport. This is the very first generation of Tesla Roadster. Of course, there's a brand new one coming allegedly that's got 0 to 60 in 1 second, but this is Tesla's first ever car that they sold here in the US and actually globally. The Roadster, was introduced in the late 2000s. And this was a car that kind of set the mold for electrification within Tesla going forward with big performance, lots and lots of money when they were due, but they had crazy incentives, if I remember right. Like here in Colorado, the tax incentives were insane on the Roadster, tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. So while the sticker was expensive, the amount of money you got back from your taxes was insane. So Hagerty saw on the models they looked at $97,000 through $115,000 in condition number 2. For like a 10-year-old, essentially a Lotus-based performance car. That's crazy. Over $100,000. Of course, very fast, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds or under 4 seconds, depending on the trim. They saw a bump in 8% in 2020 through 2021. Part of this, I believe, could be because of the crazy popularity of Tesla now. People want to get in on Genesis. And the Signature 100, so like the really special ones, 50% bump in price. Now, one thing that's worth noting about these Tesla Roadsters, very few people can work on them now, and the battery replacements are extremely expensive and unfortunately fairly common as I understand it. And these cars are very expensive to keep on the road because Tesla no longer really wants to support them. Apparently, I was talking to someone at Tesla, every single Tesla they get on trade, a Roadster, immediately gets broken up for pieces so that they can kind of keep other ones on the road. But very interesting that the Roadster has made this list for being a relatively new car. If you have the money to buy one, if you have the money to especially service one, because it's super hard to service one. There was a big facility in Arizona that was one of the leading Roadster facilities, actually just burned down, and a lot of these cars were lost. They lost tens of them, I believe. It was quite a big loss, unfortunately, in the Roadster community, considering they only built 2,500, I believe, over the course of its run. It's a special car, but expensive to keep on the road. So an interesting kind of side note about the Hagerty list, they also have one in the UK, and there were some European-specific models that we didn't get, but some of the cars they listed, which were of interest to me, I thought were like the Volkswagen T3 Transporter, which was like our Westphalia. They said that car was worth noting, paying attention to value-wise. Some other ones on that list included the first-generation Mini of BMW, so the R50 Mini, which is good because I have the supercharged version of that car, I guess. But those are really fun cars. The first generation BMW Mini, they said, is one worth holding on to and collecting. Old MGs, like pre-war 1940s MGs was on that list as well. Triumph TR6 was an interesting one. Now, of course, we have a very different market than we have here in the US, but just check out that list as well. That was pretty cool. Well, let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, this has been Tommy with TFL Classics. Check out tfl-studios.com for all of our podcast websites and videos in one place.